In 2019, a small antique shop in London's Bloomsbury district closed its doors for the final time. The owner, an elderly man named Solomon Kerr, had spent 43 years selling artifacts from the ancient world: cylinder seals from Mesopotamia, tablets with cuneiform script, pottery fragments from Uruk and Ur. But it wasn't the closure that made headlines in collector circles. It was what happened to the people who bought his Sumerian cylinder seals. Within weeks of purchase, dozens of customers began reporting the same thing: vivid dreams, impossibly detailed visions of cities they'd never seen, languages they shouldn't understand, and memories that didn't belong to them. If you're enjoying this deep dive into one of the strangest artifact mysteries of the last decade, hit subscribe. I cover forgotten history, unexplained archaeology, and the stories that don't make it into textbooks. New videos every week. Solomon Kerr opened his shop in 1976, tucked between a rare bookstore and a tailor on Museum Street. The location wasn't accidental. The British Museum was 2 blocks away, and serious collectors knew that the best finds weren't always behind glass in public galleries. They were in the hands of dealers who understood provenance, who could trace an object's journey from excavation site to auction house to private collection. Kerr specialized in Mesopotamian artifacts: Iraq, Syria, Iran, the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers where writing was invented, where the first cities rose from the floodplains 5,000 years ago. His inventory came from estate sales, from other dealers, from collectors who'd acquired pieces in the 1920s and 30s when archaeological regulations were practically non-existent. Cylinder seals were his signature item. These small stone cylinders, usually no bigger than your thumb, were carved with intricate scenes: gods and kings, mythological creatures, ritual processions. When rolled across wet clay, they left an impression, a signature, a mark of authority. Mesopotamians used them the way we use signatures today: to seal documents, to authenticate transactions, to claim ownership. The seals Kerr sold dated from 3000 BCE to 500 BCE, Akkadian period, Neo-Sumerian, Old Babylonian. Each one was documented, photographed, catalogued. He kept meticulous records: purchase date, seller information, any known history. He wasn't some back-alley hustler dealing in looted artifacts. His reputation in the antiquities world was spotless. That's what made the dream so difficult to dismiss. The first report came in March 2019, 3 months before the shop closed. A professor of ancient languages from Cambridge bought a Neo-Sumerian seal dated to approximately 2100 BCE. The carving showed a worshipper being presented to a seated deity, probably Nana, the moon god. Standard iconography for the period. The professor had been collecting cylinder seals for 20 years. This was his 14th purchase. 2 nights after he brought it home, he had the dream. He was standing in a city of mud brick buildings, the structures rising 4 and 5 stories high. The streets were narrow, shaded, crowded with people wearing wool garments and leather sandals. He could hear them speaking, and somehow, impossibly, he understood them. They were speaking Sumerian, a language he'd studied for decades, but only from texts, from reconstructions. No one had heard it spoken in 4,000 years. In the dream, he walked through a temple complex. Massive courtyards, walls covered in carved reliefs, priests performing rituals he recognized from ancient texts but had never seen enacted. The detail was overwhelming. The smell of burning juniper, the taste of barley beer, the weight of the sun on his shoulders. When he woke up, he could still remember entire conversations. He wrote down phonetic transcriptions of what he'd heard. Later, comparing them to known Sumerian texts, he found grammatical structures that matched. A vocabulary that aligned with the Ur-3 period, things he knew academically, but had never consciously connected in that way. He called it the most vivid dream of his life. Then he discovered he wasn't alone. By May 2019, at least 15 other customers had reached out to Kerr. Different seals, different time periods, but the same basic experience. Dreams of ancient Mesopotamia that felt less like dreams and more like memories. A banker from Manchester who'd bought an Akkadian seal dreamed of a ziggurat being constructed brick by brick and could describe the engineering techniques in detail he later verified against archaeological records. A retired teacher from Edinburgh dreamed of a royal banquet in Babylon and sketched the seating arrangement, the dishes served, the musical instruments played. An archaeologist from Oxford dreamed of a scribal school and woke up having written cuneiform characters she didn't consciously know. The specificity was what unsettled people. These weren't generic ancient city dreams. They contained accurate architectural details, correct religious practices, proper social hierarchies. Information that would require months of research to fabricate. And yet the dreamers had it all delivered in a single night, vivid and complete. Kerr started keeping a file. He didn't advertise it, but when customers mentioned unusual dreams, he'd ask them to write down what they experienced. By the time he closed the shop in June 2019, he had 47 documented cases. 47 people who'd bought Sumerian cylinder seals and subsequently dreamed of ancient Mesopotamia with impossible clarity. The rational explanations came quickly. Psychologists suggested that buyers were priming themselves. They'd purchased an ancient artifact, read about its historical context, and their subconscious minds constructed elaborate dreams from that research. The brain is excellent at creating false memories, at weaving disparate information into coherent narratives. Add the excitement of owning a genuine ancient object, the investment of money and emotion, and vivid dreams become almost inevitable. But that explanation struggled with the details. The Cambridge professor who'd heard spoken Sumerian, for instance, he'd studied the written language, yes, but phonetic reconstruction was speculative, based on related languages and educated guesses. No recordings existed, no native speakers remained, yet what he heard in his dream matched current linguistic models, including recent theories he hadn't read yet, theories published months after his dream. Another customer, a software engineer with no background in ancient history, dreamed of an irrigation system, canals, water gates, seasonal flooding patterns. He sketched a diagram when he woke up. An archaeologist friend later identified it as matching a known irrigation network near Gursu, a Sumerian city. The seal he'd bought came from Gursu, but he'd never researched the city, didn't know its location, its history, its agricultural systems. How had his brain constructed an accurate irrigation diagram for a location he'd never studied from a time period he knew nothing about? The skeptics had answers. Cryptomnesia, false memory syndrome, confirmation bias. The engineer must have seen a documentary once, absorbed the information subconsciously, forgotten the source. The mind plays tricks. We remember what we want to remember. We see patterns that aren't there. Ancient artifacts carry mystique, and mystique breeds fantasy. Solomon Kerr said nothing publicly. He was 81 years old when he closed the shop. His wife had died 2 years earlier. His children lived abroad. He told a journalist from the Telegraph that he was simply retiring, that the antiques trade had changed, that he was tired. But privately, to collectors he trusted, he told a different story. The seals were conduits. That's the word he used. Not magical, not supernatural. Conduits. Objects that had been handled thousands of times by ancient hands, used in rituals, pressed into clay tablets during moments of significance. Births, deaths, contracts, prayers. They absorbed something. Memory, intention, psychic residue. He didn't claim to understand the mechanism. He simply observed the pattern. The seals that generated dreams were always Sumerian, never Babylonian or Assyrian, always from the 3rd millennium BCE, the height of Sumerian civilization, and always seals that showed religious imagery, gods, temples, ritual scenes. The secular seals, the ones depicting animals or geometric patterns, generated no unusual dreams. It was as if the sacred seals carried something extra, an imprint of the world they came from. Kerr had experienced it himself. In 1983, he'd acquired a particularly fine seal from the Ur Throne period. It showed a worshipper, before the goddess Inanna. He kept it in his office, handled it daily while cataloguing inventory. 3 weeks later, the dreams began. He saw the city of Ur, the royal cemetery, the great ziggurat rising above the floodplain. Night after night, the same city, the same streets, the same people. He stopped handling the seal. The dream stopped. He sold it a month later. The buyer, a historian from Berlin, called him 6 weeks after purchase. She'd been dreaming of Ur. She'd never been to Iraq, couldn't read Sumerian. But she described the city's layout with such accuracy that Kerr pulled up archaeological site maps to compare. She was right. Every detail, every street. That's when he started keeping the file. The scientific community dismissed the whole thing as mass hysteria, a shared delusion among collectors who wanted their artifacts to be special, to carry power beyond monetary value. No peer-reviewed studies were conducted. No sleep labs invited these dreamers in for observation. The story stayed in collector circles, in forums and auction house gossip, in the footnotes of articles about the antiquities trade. But the dreams didn't stop. After Kerr closed his shop, the seals entered the secondary market. Some went to museums, others to private collectors. The British Museum acquired 3. A gallery in New York bought 5. Individual buyers took the rest. And the dreams followed them. A curator at the British Museum began dreaming of a temple complex in Nippur after working with one of Kerr's seals in the collection. She saw priests conducting a ritual for the god Enlil. She heard hymns. She woke up humming a melody and later discovered it matched fragmentary musical notation found on a cuneiform tablet from Nippur. A melody no one had heard in 4,000 years, yet somehow it was in her head, complete and accurate. The New York gallery owner reported that 2 clients who purchased Kerr's seals had returned them within a month, not because the artifacts were fake, the provenance was solid, but because the dreams were too intense, too vivid, too disturbing. One client described it as living 2 lives, his own modern existence during the day and a Sumerian existence at night. The boundary between the two was eroding. He needed the seal gone. In academic psychology circles, a term emerged, Kerr's syndrome. Not an official diagnosis, more of a nickname for the phenomenon, unusually vivid, historically accurate dreams following the acquisition of certain Mesopotamian artifacts. A handful of papers were written, mostly speculative, mostly ignored. The consensus remained the same. Suggestibility, cultural priming. Nothing supernatural, nothing to investigate seriously. Solomon Kerr died in November 2020. He was 82. The obituary in the Times mentioned his 4 decades in the antiquities trade, his expertise in Mesopotamian artifacts, his contributions to private collections and museums worldwide. It didn't mention the dreams. It didn't mention the file he'd kept, the 47 documented cases of customers reporting visions of ancient Sumer after purchasing his cylinder seals. That file is now held by his daughter in Australia. She's declined to make it public. She's declined interviews. When a documentary filmmaker reached out in 2021 asking to feature her father's story, she said simply that he wouldn't have wanted the attention, that he'd been a private man who loved history and believed objects carried stories. Whether those stories were literal or metaphorical, she couldn't say. She hadn't experienced the dreams herself. But the seals are still out there, in museums, in private collections, in university archives. Small stone cylinders carved 5,000 years ago, passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. Objects that once sealed clay tablets in the cities of Ur and Uruk and Lagash. And people are still dreaming. In 2022, a graduate student at Yale acquired one of Kerr's seals for his research on Sumerian religious iconography. He posted on an online forum for ancient Near Eastern studies 3 weeks later. The dreams had started. He was seeing temple rituals, hearing hymns, walking through a city that shouldn't exist in his mind. He asked if anyone else had experienced this. 23 people responded. All of them had owned or handled artifacts from Kerr's collection. All of them had dreamed of ancient Mesopotamia. All of them described the same unsettling feeling that they weren't dreaming at all. They were remembering. Whether the seals themselves carry some unknown property, some residual energy from millennia of ritual use, or whether the human mind simply creates elaborate stories around objects it values, no one can say for certain. The dreams persist, the reports continue, and Solomon Kerr's file grows even in death as more people come forward with their own experiences. The last antique dealer who sold Sumerian cylinder seals is gone. But the question he left behind remains. What do we touch when we touch the past? What do we absorb when we hold objects that ancient hands once held? And when we dream of worlds we never knew, are we creating fiction, or are we accessing something older, something imprinted in stone and clay and the deep memory of human civilization? The seals offer no answers. They simply exist, small, carved, silent, waiting for the next person to hold them, waiting for the next dream to begin.